thank our sponsors for the Support Local in Action series. We've got the New Westminster Record, who is our annual sponsor. We also have the City of New Westminster and the Port of Vancouver. And we also have our supporting sponsors, and that's Lorne Nankey and Waddington Wealth Management, as well as Chambers Group Insurance Plan. So thanks everyone who's here. I think that the great thing about this is that even if we don't have a ton of people here today, we are going to be able to record this and get this information out through NewWestTV and just through our website and such. So thank you very much for voting. If you haven't had a chance to vote in the poll yet, please let me know. Let's see if I've got anybody waiting. No, it looks like we're good. So we're going to get started in just a minute. I'm going to close the polling and then we'll share the results because I find this is really fascinating. So I'm going to end the polling in 5, 4, so last chance to vote. Go ahead, do it. Okay. So thanks everybody for voting. And if you can't see the results here, so half of you would like help promoting your business. About 2/3 would, or 1/3 would like survival strategies. 75% being successful with your online offerings. I really appreciate that because that's one of the things that we also understand. So we have our digital marketing series that we run every other week. Keeping your staff mentally healthy. Accessing government programs. I think that looks like people are doing that very well, so that's helpful. And absolutely none of you are interested in online privacy and security. That's probably a problem in the grand scheme of things, but ultimately I think that it's such a non-urgent problem that it's easy to put it last. Now, I'm also curious to see what consumer activities people are comfortable resuming. The last time we did this poll, it was only 30% who were comfortable dining in at a restaurant or a pub. So that has increased to 63%. And it was actually double to dine at a restaurant on a pub patio. But that is actually equal today. So that's, I think, a testament to what the restaurants have done to mitigate the impacts, and also just the great job that I guess Bonnie Henry and her team have done to make the consumers feel safe. Most people are comfortable with takeout. Again, look at about 63% of you are comfortable with retail shopping. Personal care services like haircuts, which I got yesterday, still only 50%, which I find interesting. And attending small events with indoors with physical distancing, 50%. And attending small gatherings outdoors with physical distancing. So I think that there is still a real sentiment, even though this is a very small group. I think that it does kind of give us a sense of what people are comfortable with. So I really appreciate that. So I'm going to stop sharing the results. Let's see here and close this down. And I think that without further ado, I'm going to toss it over to Val. So Val is the CEO of the BC Chamber of Commerce. And I think, again, he's done an amazing job with that role. And I think that with the BC Mind Reader program, he foretold the future very well in terms of what the needs are to be able to reach into the minds of the province of BC and to really get a sense of that. And it was extremely helpful for both the Chamber and also for government to be able to get a sense of what's happening. And so he's going to share some of the updated results he has from that program, and as well as other things, and then we can open up some time for questions and discussion at the end, and we'll see where that goes. So thanks everyone for being here, and now I'm going to introduce Val. He's going to share his screen. He's on a desktop that currently doesn't have a camera, but he will be able to, of course, you'll be able to hear him, and then at the end he's going to try and join with a camera phone so that he can talk to people and you can feel like you're having a one-on-one conversation. So without further ado, actually I've said that before, so I guess there was further ado, introducing Val Litwin. Thanks, Val.
Hey, Arnold, thanks so much. And yeah, I'm eager to turn on the camera toward the end of this because I too have to show off my new haircut after 100 days. You know, Arnold, I'm noticing when I click on my share screen, it's saying the host has disabled participant screen sharing. So you might just have to click on my profile and maybe turn me into a co-host or something. So
you are now a co-host.
Perfect. Great. Let me just do this. Beautiful. Isn't it amazing how savvy we all are now in this Zoom environment. So thank you to the New West Chamber of Commerce for inviting me today, and it's a real pleasure to be here. Arnold, a very generous introduction, and I love and appreciate that you spoke to the power of our network and all the leaders across our network, because we're only as strong as our constituent parts. The thing that makes chambers not just provincially, nationally, internationally strong is not individual chambers, it's the power of the network, and we always say collaboration is in our DNA, and to that end, it's been great seeing you take the reins of the New West Chamber of Commerce. You've done a brilliant job, and this community convening you're doing is, believe it or not, it's a very thought-leading approach to community engagement right now, and I think the polling, the resource sharing, the dialogue you're facilitating is what is going to help us get through this. So kudos to you, and what a great leader you're turning out to be in the seat. So congrats. I hope you stick around. I hope you stick around for a while. We're enjoying you in the network. So folks, Arnold asked me to, like you said, share a little bit of data, let you know what we've been working on, because I appreciate that it's not, you may be not reading every single press release and tweet that your local or provincial or national chamber is putting out there, but we have been doing a ton of work over the last 100 days, and our network has really been working overtime. I'm so proud of my team and all our chamber executives like Arnold around BC. Many of the wins that we have been able to bring about provincially and federally have been driven out of BC. And that is due to the teamwork of our local chambers, obviously the work we're doing provincially, but also connecting and leveraging resources from our national Canadian chamber. So I'm going to walk you through some of the wins, some of the work, and like Arnold said, we can do a little bit of a conversation toward the end. But starting it off with the most obvious piece, and I think it's important, I want to thank you for your grit and resilience through this, because there is no doubt in my mind that we don't have a beautiful, prosperous province without you. I don't have to walk you through the numbers. 500,000 small businesses operating in BC provides and really drive the economic backbone here for us. And so this has been, these last 3 to 4 months have been some of the most devastating and challenging of your business lives, and I think you deserve to be thanked for the fact that you've hopefully survived to date, and what's around the corner as well. And I took a few pictures from online where, you know, the scene of walking down our main street, I know this resonates for all of us, and I say here a common scene from just a few weeks ago, but I think in many communities around BC, this is what it still looks like. This is a couple of photographs from West 4th here in downtown Vancouver, but you can see here banks, retail stores, new locations that were about to open, your local dry cleaning shop, personal services closed, maybe permanently closed, laying off staff. We were about to open, now we're maybe not going to open. We've had to cut our hours, we're pivoting entirely to online. The disruption that we've seen in the last 90 to 100 days has been completely unprecedented. And I just, again, want to, I share these to sort of empathize with you on the ground, but it also paints a picture, I think, for us as chambers at the magnitude of the work we have before us, because we have never in history as a chamber network, internationally, nationally, provincially, locally, been called upon to literally save the whole economy. And it doesn't sit entirely on our shoulders, of course. This is going to take a village, and we're working in close partnership with government, with other stakeholders, yourselves, chambers around the province. But we have a very long road ahead of us, and I know today, Arnold, you're probably looking for some inspiration from me as well, so I'll share some silver linings. But it's important we acknowledge where we're at and the challenge that lies ahead of us. But what the heck have we been doing during the crisis? Well, we've been doing 3 things. We've been listening to you, and we've been taking your concerns weekly to government, as well as your best policy ideas, and leveraging media like crazy to raise awareness for those top pain points. And I've got tons of images and data I'll share in a bit. We've been supporting businesses, and that might look like at the local level webinars on how to apply for the federal wage subsidy, all the way through to collecting real-time data through our MindReader platform, which I'll talk a little bit more about as well. But it's been so essential during this crisis that we've been amplifying your voice, because that real-time insight to the heart of the machine, whether it's a local government, provincial, or federal, is essential in the decisions they make as they map out their support services and as we guide their recovery efforts. Intelligence from you on the ground is a non-negotiable. And then we've also been working to point the way forward. And as Arnold mentioned, the BC Chamber is very proud of the fact that we're one of only 9 organizations in BC that does have a seat at the Premier's Economic Recovery Task Force. So we meet, in the beginning of the crisis, we were meeting weekly. Now we meet every other week. And we're bringing our data, we're bringing our stories, and we're amplifying your voice at that table. But speaking of data and amplifying your voice, I want to share some data off the top, but your engagement on our bcmindreader.com platform has been the difference maker here, because it's data now in this modern age that does create the clear narrative for government. The age of anecdote is dead. You have to be an evidence-based entity if you want a seat at the table, especially with government. And so you should be proud. You should know that the BC Chamber and our local network, we are the only chamber, we were the first, and thankfully now a few others have followed, but we were the first provincial business network in Canada to frame up an online insight community, which is what bcmindreader.com is. And that sounds like a very fancy phrase, but essentially we have a conversation platform that sits in the cloud, and you can sign up for it for free at bcmindreader.com. And the whole point is we're in conversation with you. We're listening to what you're saying on the ground in real time. We're sending you back that data so you can run a better business. As Arnold just showed, there's power when you poll people and you find out what's keeping them up at night, because it helps inform your decisions and where you need to go. But let me share some of the freshest data that has come off our BC Mindreader platform. And remember, this is your voice. This has been coming from you. So this first slide, this was from our most recent survey during the COVID crisis. This is Pulse 3. So we've been doing what we say, quote unquote, pulsing the business community to find out how things are changing. What are the business impacts as we move through crisis, but maybe more importantly, what are you saying in terms of how the programs are helping or not, so we can take that intelligence back to government and help them trim course with a lot of these programs. And we've seen that happen, the wage subsidy being a great example of that. So a little bit of data. And unfortunately, this data is pretty grim, but it's the truth. And so this is what we've been taking to government. You can see, I'm saying here in Pulse 3, I think our whole survey, this closed just a couple of weeks ago, so again, very, very fresh. I think this whole survey can be summarized in one data point when it comes to restart and recovery. You can see here the question is, with the gradual easing of restrictions, is your business well prepared to restart and operate profitably? Well, only a quarter, about 1 in 4 of our members in BC are feeling well prepared to restart and operate profitably. I mean, these are unbelievably low numbers, right? And I expect these numbers to change over time, but you can see how presenting this information to government helps underscore through their lens where they need to be focusing, the size of the hill we need to climb here when it comes to business supports and getting people open and operating again. We're hearing a lot from businesses that they're falling through the cracks. You know, we appreciate no government has a blueprint for a global pandemic like this, but we've been pivoting out and finding out how are these programs working for you? Are you qualifying? Do you expect to receive these benefits? And right now, when it comes to, just as one example, the emergency wage subsidy, which subsidizes up to 75% of your payroll up to a certain amount, almost half of businesses in BC are saying, you know, we don't expect to qualify or receive this wage subsidy. Additionally, also on the commercial rent assistance program, more than half, almost 60%, are saying, look, we're not going to qualify for the commercial rent assistance program. And there's a number of reasons for that. One is, you know, maybe we don't have a landlord that wants to play ball, but it could also be a function of some of the other you know, detail in terms of the program, some of the risk that's embedded in that for landlords that's making them say, hey, look, this is not a program we think we can participate in. You can see here, has your landlord indicated they will apply for the rent assistance program? Half are saying their landlord has not indicated if they will even participate in the program, like I was mentioning. A big component of our narrative to the Premier and his task force when we meet every couple of weeks, and kudos to BC for setting up this economic recovery task force before other jurisdictions. But it's our job to keep advocating for business and keep top of mind for them the most important components of recovery. What you have been telling us is that you still need support, and this feeds into a larger theme we've been sharing with the Premier and his team, that the supports we've rolled out in recovery, that we've rolled out in the crisis to get through the crisis, we'll need different ones in recovery. So we're not through this simply because we've had a 3-month wage subsidy or we've had our rent subsidized by a joint federal-provincial program for a couple of months. We're going to need more. And we know that this is very much about cash flow support as businesses begin to reopen, because you can imagine maybe I'm a hair salon, I've business as usual, that's not what I'm going back to. I have to pay for plexiglass partitions between chairs at my front counter. I have to be thinking about PPE, staggered shifts. Maybe I can't put as many clients in my space anymore. So increased costs, lower revenues. So our members are saying, hey, look, we're going to need a lot of help to get through this restart too. Just because my doors are open doesn't mean the customers are coming back. Over half of our members are saying they will need another 2 to 3 months to restart. And so this is goes back to what we're saying around things like, and we'll talk about this in a few slides, the extension to the temporary layoff provision that says in BC previously that if you hit that 13-week mark of someone being laid off, now that's essentially deemed a constructive dismissal. We were successful with a group of other business associations getting that timeline extended from 13 weeks to 16 weeks, but we're coming up on 16 weeks now. So we've been advocating for a further extension because we're saying to government, look, businesses are trying to open, but they're going to need time. So they're going to be hiring people back slowly, but they're still keeping them on health benefits in many cases. And the intent is to get their teams back and working. So let's be patient, let's be understanding with some of these legislative pieces and extend that time frame. Because you can imagine when we hit that 16-week deadline of constructive dismissal, it's going to trigger a round of massive severance payouts, and that will cripple many small, medium-sized enterprises that are looking to hopefully recover and open, maybe even just a few weeks hence. I think this is my final slide here. We've heard a lot of feedback too around the reopening plan. A lot of the critique from the business community is around, hey, we're just not getting enough clarity and certainty from the plan, and we don't think it's stimulating enough consumer demand. Now, things are evolving as businesses open, and I think more clarity is coming. I know WorkSafe is working overtime to keep rolling out more guidelines and checklists to map a way forward for people. But we know this all hinges on consumer and team confidence, right? So if businesses aren't feeling like they understand what the parameters are, they're going to struggle to create safe, stable workplaces for their teams, and that will affect consumer confidence as well. And if the consumers aren't confident, they're not coming back, they're not spending. So what the business community is saying, and where we've been grateful that we can take this insight to government, is government, keep working to define the pathway forward here, and let's come up with additional ways to stimulate consumer demand, because if we can't get this cycle moving again, we're going to be in big trouble. So all of this data is coming out of our bcmindreader.com platform, and I'm guessing, Arnold, probably some of the folks on the call today have had a chance to sign up, but I'll say now, just as my quick PSA, this is a free benefit to you as a chamber member. When I joined a couple of years ago, I said to my board that our opportunity now as BC's biggest and broadest business network is to take this brick and mortar network we have that is physical. It's not 36,000 likes on a Facebook page. We have 36,000 businesses around BC that we support through our 125 local chambers. But let's now put them into the cloud so we can be tapping into what's on their mind daily, weekly, monthly. And what's unique about this platform, because I don't think anyone gets up early in the day and thinks I want to take a survey. What's fun about this is you join a community, and when you join, you tell us where you operate, how many employees you have, what business sector you're in, and now we don't have to fatigue you with those questions every time we come out for a quick survey. So we can talk to you about ride sharing in 14 seconds, answer 2 quick questions. We take it to government. And the beauty of the platform, and this is where it is a bit of an improvement on data gathering in the past, which was very much about being a data vampire. You know, associations would suck data out of their members and you'd never hear back from your association again because they would take it to government and they wouldn't keep you updated. The platform sends you the insights and the data, which I think helps you run a better business. But this has emerged as the definitive insight platform for business in BC through COVID-19. So I want to thank you for engaging with the platform. So how does it work? If you're not on the platform, I'll just tell you very quickly that that thing I mentioned before about once you're in and we ask you a couple of core questions, that's what we mean in the middle of the diagram here when we say relationship memory. Now that the platform knows you, we don't have to fatigue you with long surveys. We can get right to the point. But we pivot out every week or 2 or 3. We ask you a couple of questions. You tell us what's on your mind. We send that insight back to you in government. It's a very quick feedback loop. And we now have over 3,000 businesses in BC chiming in every couple of weeks. So I encourage you to join. I know you'll really dig it. But what has that meant for us? It can be very unsexy to talk about data and surveys. You know, if I'm a paying member of a chamber, you know, show me the goods. How is this changing the game for my local chamber, my provincial chamber, and the power of the advocacy work we do? Well, this is a little tic-tac-toe example. So you can see over here on the left, one of the pulse surveys we sent out a couple of weeks ago. It immediately translated into a cover story in the Vancouver Sun. You can see some of the data we're able to put there, some of the key messages we could inject into the mediascape. And this created a lot of movement for us in Ottawa and Victoria early days around where we needed to tweak some of the programs that we're rolling out. And it hasn't stopped. As we've been in ongoing real-time dialogue with you, we've been continuing to drive really powerful stories that are getting syndicated around the province, really crisp, clear messaging. And you can see here this one title in Business in Vancouver, nearly half of BC businesses may not or will not reopen. This creates a whole other level of urgency for government when they see these headlines coming out. And to my earlier comment around the power of data, you can't debate data. So this has given us, as our network, an entirely new tool and leverage and clout in our conversations with government. And we use the tool for good, not evil, right? This is about real-time insight, supporting government as a responsible partner. We are nonpartisan. We work with whatever political parties in power, but we think they should be making evidence-based decisions, and your data is helping drive that in Victoria and in Ottawa. So as we've been going through this, great, what have we accomplished? What have we done? Again, some of it is very unsexy work. It's maybe happening in the background. Maybe you don't know what your chamber network has accomplished, so let me run you through some of the wins right now. But it is important you understand that when you join a local chamber, you're a part of a provincial chamber, you're a part of a national chamber. You are connected to BC and Canada's largest business network, and we've been doing some great work through the crisis. So I'll just quickly run you through a couple of things we've done. We know from you, and you saw some of the previous data, that the commercial rent assistance program is very lacking. So our view on this is we're trying to improve on an imperfect program. Again, governments have not had a blueprint on this. They have been scrambling, so we've been patient and we've been collaborative. But we've also used the media and the data to push the program in directions we think it's needed to go. So you'll note a couple of weeks ago we had a very significant win with Carol James announcing a moratorium on commercial evictions during COVID-19. And so this was a significant one for us. On the commercial rent piece as well, you may have seen an op-ed I wrote a couple of weeks ago in the Van Sun, just calling on landlords to begin to engage with the program. The data we've been getting back through MindReader is fascinating on this particular program, and it gave us some excellent insights that we were able to send to Ottawa and Victoria around how they need to tweak the program. I'll tell you briefly what you told us. The data we received on this particular program was that, in fact, too many tenants in good faith were continuing to meet their lease obligations. Now, I say too many. They're legally mandated, they're under contract, so there's never too many tenants paying their rent. That's the contract you enter when you sign a lease. But what I mean to say is the joint federal provincial program around commercial rent assistance would guarantee for a number of months 75% of a landlord's rent, right? So the tenant would agree to pay 25%, the landlord would eat 25%, and then the province and feds would come in with 25% each. So the tenant gets their rent reduced by 75%, and the landlord gets 75% of the rent. Feds and the province come in to fill in the gap. Problem was, 82% of tenants in BC are still paying their rent. So do the simple math here, right? Why would a landlord who's watching their income statement each month, why would he or she apply to a program that reduces their overall rent intake to 75% of their total income when they're still getting 82% of their income? So what we were able to say to government is, hey, very well-intentioned program, but amongst the other issues with this program, you have a simple math problem. The reason landlords aren't applying for the program is they're making too much money still. Cash flow is good. But the op-ed here was, we also have data that says businesses only have about 30 days left of cash. So landlords, the call to action here was landlords, yep, your P&Ls looked pretty good so far, but we have more data than you do. Businesses don't have much cash left in their banks. So we encourage you to get into that program stream quickly because your P&L is about to change. And we saw a number of big landlords begin to engage with the program just a day or two after that. So this is just an example of where we use data, media, and our strong voice at the Premier's Task Force Roundtable to drive outcomes for you. I've talked a little bit already about the extension of the constructive dismissal period. Again, I know some of this stuff can sort of bore you to death when you're looking at it on the screen. What does this mean for me? You can see some of my bullets here. The BC Chamber and our local network, including great and vocal leadership from people like Arnold at your local chamber, we helped drive the extension initially from 13 to 16 weeks. So that means if you're a business in a local community, you had to close because perhaps the provincial health officer said you have to close, well, you had to lay off your team. So at the 13-week mark, you would have now had to pay out severance to maybe 20 staff. But maybe you still want to reopen. So that's what this was all about, province. Keep extending that constructive dismissal period because we know businesses want to reopen. So don't punish them with this deadline. We're now pushing very hard to extend it beyond 16 weeks. I do think we have a fight ahead of us. But the contention here to the province is, look, if you don't change it, this will lead to another wave of insolvencies and defaults. And are we not trying to preserve businesses here so they can keep people employed and eventually getting off CERB? So that continues to be a big piece for us. Another significant fight for us where we have worked very closely with Premier Horgan, you can imagine many people are wondering as they reopen it, and if it all hinges on consumer confidence, well, what the heck are we doing for our teams who need to feel backstopped if they get sick? They're being told they can't come to work if they have the sniffles, and that's correct. That's what we should be doing. But what if they contract COVID-19 in the workplace? Well, this is not something that should sit on the backs of business. And so the BC Chamber has been asking for a temporary solution during COVID-19 where the feds would step in to backstop sick pay so that businesses don't have to pay out an additional 14 days of sick pay, which we know would bankrupt thousands of SMEs in BC. So we've been successful backing Premier Horgan. In fact, the business community led with this concept, but we put, and kudos to him for seizing the moment, we put the Premier at the front of the pack. He's been advocating in Ottawa. You'll note if you've been watching the media, Prime Minister Trudeau has taken this suggestion out of BC and has converted it into a $14 billion program for provincial and territorial restart. We know a portion of that is being flagged for sick pay. And so it's a win in progress, but folks, this is significant. If we can lock in the feds to cover off sick pay during COVID-19, this just enhances your viability through recovery. So where are we at on this right now? The feds, like I say here in this slide, put the money on the table, and the mechanics and implementation are being worked out by the provinces and the feds, hopefully before the second wave hits. But I can't tell you what a big win this is for our network, and this is a BC win, and it's straight out of the Chamber network. Tourism is a big part of our economy too in all communities around BC. So this is, I won't go into the detail here, but this is just to note that we think because of our stellar performance on health and safety, BC should be a jurisdiction that when it's time, when it's appropriate, when we can still mitigate the risks, should welcome visitors again. I'm not suggesting we're opening the border anytime soon, but we should be developing a strategy in the interim to make sure we're out of the gates strong, especially when you consider how tourism drives our economy. You can see some of the high-level numbers here: 300,000 jobs in BC, about $6 billion in annual GDP. And we know that this sector was the hardest hit. They were the first to be shut down, and we know they'll likely be the last ones back at the table, simply because of border closures, contact intensity, some of the parameters around large gatherings. So, but we know we need a strategy on this, and I note that the Canadian Chamber is now co-hosting a national roundtable on getting tourism up and running again in Canada when it's time. So this is something we've been taking to the Premier's task force to make sure it stays on their radar as well. And to that end, and I'll start to wrap up here, Arnold, you do have a seat at the table. Your BC Chamber does sit on the BC Economic Recovery Task Force chaired by the Premier and Minister James. I think it's important you know that, and it helps provide that clear line of sight, Arnold, as we've been saying on this call, why the data is so important, because we take it every other week to the roundtable and we share what you're saying with the Premier. So just know you have that connection you're speaking truth to power every other week with the data we capture in the communities and through local chambers. The core messages to the province are simple. Continue to listen to the data. Businesses are being devastated, so we need to keep the supports coming. There is urgency here. We've performed well on the health and safety outcomes, but we're nowhere near, close to recovery yet. So we need to keep up the pace with the supports and the strategy rollout of our economic recovery plan. Businesses are still saying it's all about the cash. So any supports need to be thinking about how do we enhance liquidity for SMEs. This is not about debt. A deferred payment doesn't help. A loan that I have to repay doesn't help. So we've said to the province, this is not something you'd normally hear from a business association, but go big or go home. Our members are saying a little bit of debt in the short term makes sense if it keeps us alive and driving prosperity tomorrow. So let's not be shy, and let's think about what we need on that recovery path. And we do need a plan. BC right now has a restart plan, a reopen plan. We need to put together an economic recovery strategy now. Like I said, we have some natural advantages here in terms of how we performed to date, so let's leverage those advantages. And as a final parting thought here on what recovery will look like, we know it will take time, but we understand this week we'll be hearing more from Minister James on how the $1.5 billion that was put aside for recovery, we're going to hear a little bit more about how that will be deployed, or at least the consultation around how that will be deployed. We know the approach to recovery here, point two, is that it is a dial, not a switch. So we have to expect there's going to be a continued incremental easing of restrictions. So I know most of you have already been thinking through what your new operating reality looks like, but continue to refine the best practices for your sector, for your particular business. And remember, it's all about confidence. So the thing that will get our customers back and our team feeling locked and loaded for the work they need to do is really how you're operating your business in this new post-COVID-19 world. And I just say the dance here because it is a dial, not a switch. So if we hit a second wave, we're understanding the province is going to put in measures again. So that's why it is so important, as the numbers are getting better, to really nail your operating practices now, because if in November, December it comes back, we want to make sure businesses aren't closing. So we need to develop those disciplines around PPE, social distancing, et cetera, et cetera. Obviously, many of the old ways of doing business will go out the window. We're hearing talk a lot more about resilience, which means shorter supply chains, more interprovincial trade, thinking about local procurement, self-sufficiency. These are all principles we need to be weighing now in our new business model approach, and being more resilient generally. So how, asking the questions of yourself and bringing your team and boards into this conversation, how do we need to evolve our model? It's a bit of a no-brainer for all of us today to say, well, yeah, we appreciate if you can go online, you need to do that, but how does a distributed workforce now impact your model and your business as well? So these are some of the things we're encouraging people to think about as they approach recovery. So Arnold, I will leave it there. I'm going to now dial in, without hanging up here, I'm going to dial in on my phone so I can show my face. And we can do some Q&A. Hopefully I didn't go on too long there. Thank you.
Thanks, Val. That was excellent. You know, I think that, and thank you for all the shout outs. I really appreciate that. I do think that, you know, it is incredibly important. And the more people from, you know, we can share, we can get people on the MindReader platform, the more that we can use it for our purposes to really get a pulse of this particular community. So we continue to urge that. And the people here, if you can share that, or if you haven't joined yet, I do encourage you to join. I do have a couple of questions for you, Val, but maybe I'll just wait till we can see your shining face and see how that works here. Let's see. Do you want to stop sharing your screen so we can do a gallery view with the attendees?
You bet. And Arnold, I'm still dialing in here, so let's go ahead and start with the Q&A, and hopefully I'll be dialing in just a second here.
All right. Okay. So gallery view here. So we had one question from Quinn, which I thought was really interesting, and I'd love to hear your thoughts, Val, on the support local campaigns. You know, on the one hand, I think that they are extremely effective, and I think that this community is really rallied around its businesses in a lot of ways. And on the other hand, I think that it also you know, really, I guess, insulates communities from potentially sharing resources. So how do you think that's going to play out in the coming weeks or months ahead? And I'm going to ask you to try and predict the future. But you know, obviously, you can't expect you to know perfectly the future. But you know, when you have so many data points at your fingertips, perhaps you can see trends that we can't, and so hopefully we can tap into that. And I tried to ask that question in a very long ways to see if we could get the dialing in working out. But so just answer that.
And I can see my mobile device is still thinking here, so I don't know, I might be having technical difficulties. Arnold, I got the latter half of that question, but sorry, the first half, the connectivity was a little bit bad on my end for just a moment there. To say the first part of the question again, I get that you're asking me to predict the future. We've obviously got some good data, but this was around what in particular?
Yeah, well, I'm just wondering what you think of how the support local campaigns are going to evolve. Do you think that's going to create, you know, go from kind of a community-based to a more regional-based support local, or you know, how do you think that's going to work? Because I think that's a double-edged sword of both reducing access for customers if you're in a small community, you know, especially like us where we're surrounded by larger communities, and at the same time, you know, really critical to have that tie with the community. What are your thoughts about the support local and how it might evolve over time?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is going to be a huge part of our recovery. And I mentioned in my presentation there, obviously, a very logical consideration now when you look at the global supply chain disruption during COVID-19 is we need to be shortening some of our supply chains. And I appreciate not all of us will have that option. You know, we operate in a very global environment now, but to know what suppliers you might have locally or provincially at a minimum that could feed into your supply chain if your traditional supply chains get disrupted. So to your point, you know, this notion of shop local, you can sort of expand that blast radius from immediate local, like your neighborhood, to your municipality, to neighboring municipalities, to your province, to your nation. But I think, first of all, you're going to find there's a lot of appetite for people to support local. And a big driver of that is, frankly, that in the short term, we know confidence for individuals to move around and travel is low. So they are eating local, they're shopping local, they're going to local parks, they're convening locally in smaller groups. So I think we have a window here where we can create a real awareness around the power of local, and the communities and local business organizations that frame up some brand messaging around that and some clear calls to action, and maybe some digital platforms that bring businesses together so they can see what's in their community, I think will perform very well, because this is very much about resilience as well. And we know when we shop local, you're circulating more dollars. They stay in your local community, which is not just good from a business perspective, but we know from a social perspective, you know, it's local SMEs that give to your local charities, less so big corps. So I predict this will be a big part of our recovery. I think chambers can play a role.
Yeah, thanks, Val. So I'm just going to close the door because I realize my kids are just coming home, and close the door to my office there. So I have another question. I think this is one that is also asking you to predict the future, but perhaps you might have some insight. Obviously, there's a real balance. I think the government did an excellent job of, I'm just going to create a speaker view here, did an excellent job of, you know, scaring us or making sure that we were taking the safety precautions. But that now has the double-edged sword of having consumers be very nervous about you know, getting back into the economic you know, engine. And I'm just wondering, what do you think is the right balance, or how are we going to manage that? And I realize that you're just doing some technical stuff here, so you might not have missed that question, but or I might have missed that question. But ultimately, what is that balance between having, you know, kind of, or what do you think is the secret to getting consumers confident again out into the public? And you're muted there. Sorry, I muted you. Unmute you. There we go. Oh, I think you got to accept that. There you go.
Perfect. And Arnold, give me, apologies to do this again, folks. Just give me the first 10 words of your question. So I know you were asking about confidence again. I was just switching over platforms. Sorry about that.
Yeah. Oh, hey, nice haircut, by the way.
Well, you know, I was almost able to braid my sideburns yesterday up until about 4 o'clock, but thankfully that's changed. My wife is, I noticed I was getting more hugs last night. So
well, that's probably a good news. What is the balance between making sure the consumers are staying safe, or what is the secret to, I guess, instilling consumer confidence? Have you seen any examples in communities where they're starting to have that kind of messaging as opposed to more of the safety messaging?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a couple of things you can do. But the first thing as a general principle is you can't fake your new operating protocols when it comes to health and safety. So take the time to map out your plan. By the way, all these templates and guidelines obviously are at worksafebc.com. But I think a big part of this, it's all mentioned in all the materials, but Arnold, you know, the employers, in my mind, the employers that are involving their teams in the iterative process to design their new operating protocols are creating more confident teams and work cultures. And that radiates out to the customer once those businesses get going again. So I'd say involve your teams, and businesses that are nailing the visual cues in their physical spaces, I think, are creating a lot more confidence. You know, we all have that experience now, and we built in these habits because we've been out there, maybe not at many business, but certainly probably liquor stores and grocery stores. We see the cues on the floor. We see the lines to keep us distant. We're being told to wait outside. So how you operationalize some of these new practices will really translate to the customer that you're in control. You understand what the provincial health officer is saying, and it creates a bit of an unconscious, I think, feeling of comfort for customers. So involve your teams, nail the visual cues. And there is a program coming out from either WorkSafe or Go2HR, or maybe it's in partnership. And I know the province has been vetting this program as well, that will allow people to make a commitment to cleanliness and health and safety protocols, and they'll be able to post an announcement about that. So it'll, you know, you think about the Better Business Bureau, for example, if you see that sticker outside a business, it cues you that I'm about to walk into a reputable, well-operated business. Similar, this is a similar campaign. And again, it's based around getting a commitment from the employer, but signaling to the customer, we observe these best practices, and we appreciate that they're a non-negotiable for a safe operating environment. So keep your eyes peeled for that, but that would be, I think, an easy win for people to engage with that program.
Yeah, thanks, Val. I think that's some really excellent tips there. Hopefully, that'll get disseminated out to this community too. I totally agree. I think that actually seeing people do the cleaning, I've been to some, you know, stores where, you know, someone touches something and then someone rushes in and disinfects it right after you've gone there. I think that kind of thing also really enhances, and I think that goes to visual cues too, because I just think you think, oh, well, it's happening. So I think that's really great. One of the questions that, you know, we're in this kind of, I think people are really feeling more confident in the community. At least that's my sense. You know, there's more interactions. People are still doing the socially distant thing, but there's sort of laxing the guard. What is your sense from sitting around the table around the next steps, or when you think the next phase is going to get kicked in? Is there any, I know you can't quite give the insight, but is that kind of talk happening at the table? And what's the resistance to that right now?
Yeah, so, this maybe goes back a little bit to this analogy that I know the Premier has kind of borrowed from Governor Jay Inslee in Washington, that recovery and reopen is a dial, not a switch. It's incremental. And so my understanding is obviously the provincial health officer is monitoring very closely our health and safety KPIs, or key performance indicators. So we know from their very complex model that during full shutdown, we were at about 30% of full operating or typical operating capacity and social interactions here in BC. They've turned the dial, and we understand based on the model, BC is sitting at about 65% of normal operating capacity right now. And they're still watching the health and safety, let's call it the dashboard, like the KPI dashboard. So I understand the next phase will be kicking in fairly short order this summer. But it will always be a function of how the provincial health office is interpreting the data. Now, we understand we're continuing to perform really well here in BC, and I'm sure some of your members on this call and yourself caught the incredible New York Times piece on Dr. Bonnie Henry 2 weekends ago. So there's no doubt BC is doing it right. In fact, we're performing better than most jurisdictions on planet Earth. So I think that bodes well for the following phases. But, there is a lot of talk with certain sectors and verticals that are saying, we don't think we belong in phase 4, the final phase, because that's, apparently we're not there until we see a vaccine. But you know what, I'm going to use the BCHL as an example. So unlike the NHL, the BCHL doesn't have multi-million-dollar television contracts and sponsorship arrangements. So if we actually want to preserve a regional amateur sports league like the BCHL, we need to be having pretty wide-eyed conversations around how we get them into a different phase and how we support them from a health and safety standpoint, partitioning fans differently, reconfiguring stadiums, things like this. So I'm not an expert on that, and I'm always very cautious about even appearing to suggest that I know better than the provincial health office. I do not. But these are some of the conversations we're hearing, Arnold, and what we're trying to do is leverage the emerging best practice to make a case for some of these businesses and sectors that are maybe right now in a bucket that's down the road, saying, we can probably move them up a little bit. But I think it will continue to be how we perform as a larger community. And when I say larger community, I mean as a province with our health and safety outcomes. I don't know, did I adequately answer your question there?
I think so. I'm trying to, yes, I think you did. Another question I have, and this is similar, but obviously different businesses require different levels of customers. And one of the ways that we can stay safe is with social bubbles. The more you expand your bubble, the greater the risk. And it seems to me in a lot of ways, BC as an entire province is its own social bubble. And I know that there's a lot of fear about opening the borders to the U.S. or even maybe that, Ontario or Quebec where the infection is still. Can you tell me a bit about the friction between, maybe on the economic table where we need to open up and allow kind of free travel to enhance the economy while at the same time making sure, is there, you say the BCHL is a great example. What industries are really demanding that kind of opening, or is it really more of a unanimous voice of like we should bubble or only open to communities that have an equal level of infection in their communities?
Yeah, well, I mean, you probably touched on one of the more contentious and lively conversations, right? We're having not just provincially but nationally. I mean, every time you expand that concentric ring or that blast radius, you're adding complexity to the system, right? So we know, for example, in some of the border communities in BC and Alberta where they see a lot of cross-border tourism traffic, there's been friction. Cars in Radium are getting keyed by locals when they see cars with Alberta license plates. Well, I don't think that's the way we want to operate, but there's feelings around, hey, we don't appreciate people coming from high infection rate areas into areas that have seen no cases yet. So it is a balancing act, and you kind of put your finger on it. There's hydraulics there. There's push and pull. We want to find an approach that allows communities to come back and get some of that economic activity moving again, but we want to let data drive the degree to which we tweak the dial, going back to the dial analogy again. So tourism and hospitality is obviously probably the front runner industry sector by and large that is very keen to have government articulate a strategy on how we approach that. And that's a federal strategy and a provincial strategy. In BC, we're very dependent on the visitor economy, which is tourism. We know that right now we will not be welcoming any international visitors. So it's all about domestic tourism. So how do we embrace people from neighboring communities, other provinces, to come out here and enjoy what we have to offer? I think we want those people to come. The question is, are people developing those disciplines around self-diagnosis? I think some of us have probably had to travel on BC ferries in the last 100 days. You're looking at those signs as you approach the wicket that says, have you had a temperature? Have you had a cough? Are you exhibiting any of those symptoms? We all have a shared responsibility at the individual level before we get swabbed or our temperature taken, before we get on the plane, to be accountable for our own health as well. So there's a dimension of personal responsibility with all of this, but I know within our network, Arnold, we have many communities that are saying, look, we're ready to welcome people in. We have developed a new best practice ourselves. We have ways of keeping people safe. We maybe didn't 30 days ago. We maybe didn't have the same sophisticated level of understanding of how we welcome guests in this new environment, but they do now. Mm-hmm. And so I hope in BC we'll see a lot of domestic tourism this year. I'm looking at booking an Airbnb in Nelson later this summer. I hope I can go, but I think I have a responsibility not just to be safe myself, keep others safe, but also to support an economy that's struggling. Mm. So we'll make different decisions. We'll probably pack more food and picnic apart from people, but it's one of the trickier parts of the conversation, because it's all about balance. But I hope we'll lose the binary fear that's been hammered into us, that either you stay in your cave or you die. That's not the situation we're in anymore, and I think people need to start getting out.
Thanks, Val. This time has flown by. We're just at 11 o'clock. I can't believe it. Do you have a time for just two quick more questions?
Do you know what? I actually have to get on another call, Arnold. I'm so sorry, but
no problem. I understand.
If there were questions that you wanted to send through, I'd be happy to answer them. So, but it's been a real pleasure. I'm sorry. Time did go fast. That went way faster than I thought. Yeah. So I hope I wasn't too long-winded. Hopefully there was some useful stuff in there.
Thanks, Val, for taking the time. Thanks, everybody, for being here. Looking forward to a conversation the next time. Join us next week for our digital marketing series, where we're going to talk about effective landing pages. So I think that is so important for your online, converting your online customers. A bad landing page converts at about 0.5%, where a good landing page can convert up to 11%. That's 22 times better just by changing your landing page. So make sure you join us for that one. Thanks again, Val, and everyone who stopped by, thank you. We'll put a recording of this up, so please share it. And Val, once again, thank you for your excellent work and for your support from to our chamber and to me personally. And I look forward to our next conversation.
Thanks, Arnold, for convening this. Thanks for all your leadership and the great work you're doing. And thanks to all your members and probably maybe board reps that dialed in today. It was a real pleasure.
What's going on with this one here?
All right.
Need to be laminated?
All right. Thanks, everybody.